Amen. Ten times a man named Moses stared at the king of Egypt called Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." For over 400 years, the people of God had been in Egypt. It started with a very small group, a little family of about 70 people that ended up coming there because of an enormous famine that spread throughout the Middle East, northern Africa. And when they arrived there in that little family of 70, they weren't slaves. But as they grew, eventually one of the kings or pharaohs of Egypt saw an opportunity for free labor to build cities, and he enslaved them. And now Moses has shown up because God has put it on his heart to do something about the slavery in which his own people exist. And 10 times he looks at Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he says, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh 10 times looks back at him and says, "No." Last week, Jason, our community outreach pastor, walked us through the 10 plagues of Egypt, where every time Pharaoh would say no, God would have an answer. And he walked us through those 10 plagues, and he concluded with the 10th last week. The 10th, which we know now today, even among the people of God, as the Passover. Now, for the people of God, they know it as the Passover. For the people in Egypt, they knew it as the night of the death of the firstborn. A day when the firstborn in every Egyptian household stopped breathing. And there was mourning and there was screaming all throughout the land of Egypt. And we pick up this week in Exodus 12, verse 31. And during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites, go worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go and also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, "We will all die." Now, I just want to walk through this just for a second. It's the middle of the night. He summons Moses, like, "Get out, I'm done." Moses didn't even have to say, "Hey, let my people go." He summons him. He's like, "Look, I'm letting you go. Get out quickly. Move. Take whatever you want with you. Just go. Get out." What's interesting is as he's telling him to go, he says, "Take your flocks, your herds, as you said, and go." And then he has this little line. He says, "And also, would you bless me?" Can we just forget about 400 years? You know, the people of Egypt, when they hear that Pharaoh's okay with it, the people start echoing Pharaoh. And they're like, "Look, please. Pharaoh said go, we're saying go. In fact, we know if you stay, we're all gonna die. Your God is not gonna stop until all of us are done. So get out, move, go." Now, can you imagine what it's like? And the Bible tells us at the time there was about 600,000 men. All right, so they didn't count women and children in this count, just 600,000 men. And so there's a lot of people. And as word starts spreading like wildfire amongst this community and this land of Goshen, which is where they were living, as word starts to spread, can you imagine like the first people to stick their head out the door, and they're like opening their door, and they're like, "Did somebody say we could leave?" And everybody's like, that's what I heard. Like, "Who told you?" Like, "My neighbor told me." "Who told her?" "That neighbor." Like, "Have y'all played telephone before?" He probably didn't say go. He probably said no. That's probably what he said. "Y'all gonna get us killed." But no, everybody's starting to go. And the first people, they're like, "I think we're going." And they're looking back like, "Is Pharaoh coming?" No, Pharaoh's not coming. And then eventually you've seen it before in the movies. Dorothy does it on the yellow brick road, that little skip thing, follow the yellow brick. That's what's happening. They're out of there. Slavery is behind them. They're like, "Let's go." Not only could they go, They could take all their stuff with them. They got their cattle, their herds, they got their goats, and they're just piling on that. This is incredible. Let's go. Where are we going? To a promised land. A promised land flowing with milk and honey. Milk and honey sounds so much better than sand and bricks. You know, that's what their life was. Milk and honey, give me some of that milk and honey. It works for about 2 chapters. You read back half of Exodus 12, Exodus 13. You get to Exodus 14, verse 5. This is what happens. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and he took his army with him. Now notice, he says, "What have we done?" If I was in his court, I said, who is this we of which you speak? What have you done? You did this. All of a sudden, he turns into a Chick-fil-A employee. Did you hear it? He says, what? He's sharing leadership. What have we done? And then he goes even further. He says, we have let the Israelites go and we have lost their services. What? What Chick-fil-A nonsense? We have lost their service. You have lost their slavery. Don't Joe PG this. Notice he knew he was going to need an army because he wasn't going to walk back up to them, catch up to their caravan and say, excuse me, we would like to have your services back in Egypt. We have left your place just like you left it. You're welcome to come back anytime. Like he knew that wasn't going to be the conversation. It was going to be, I need chariots, I need fighting men. Let's go round these folks up. You see, what had happened is his grief stage switched. He was mourning the loss of his firstborn son, and sorrow caused him to release them. But he had moved into the grief stage of anger. And suddenly the only thing that could quench that anger was to undo what he had done. Verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert? Brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Now, what we don't know is exactly what it looks like, but we have this image that's being created where the Egyptians are coming for them, and it says that they look up and they see the Egyptians. So it feels like they were maybe down a little plain or valley or lower area, and there's maybe a huge hill, and all of a sudden this army crests the hill. And as they're looking up, they can see, oh, that's the Egyptians. We've seen those chariots before. Maybe they had a headdress on. I don't know, that little funky thing that Pharaohs wear in movies. That's probably what he had on. And they're like, hey, I got it. I've seen that. The Egyptians are coming. And what they say, it says they were terrified. Terrified. In their mind, there was only one logical conclusion. They're coming. We're going to die. Death is the only thing that waits us whenever they decide to come on down that hill. Death is and then they start working out their logic. They're like, hold on, it makes sense now. Moses was in on this. There are so many of us, 600,000 men, plus women and children, so many people. There wasn't enough graves in Egypt to kill us. Moses must have been involved. He must have made a deal with Pharaoh. They said, look, I'm done with these Hebrews. I would like to slaughter them all, but Egypt will stink. So if you can get them to the desert, then I'll come do the slaughtering, and you can go back to shepherding in Midian with your father-in-law, and we'll just call it even, right? That's what they're thinking. They're like, that must have been what happened, is that there's not enough graves in Egypt. You made a deal, and now this is the plan? That's the only thing they could think of. which is wild to me. It's wild to me. Here's the thing though, here's the truth. It's not just for them, it's for us. It's the same thing. When we have a lack of faith, it always leads to an abundance of fear. It's a true statement. When we have a lack of faith, it always leads to an abundance of fear. Had they forgotten already? That question is a central question in the story of the people of God. Over and over again, if we were to read every narrative in chronological order of all the people of God throughout the Old Testament, over and over again, at some point in the narrative, I would say, have they forgotten already? It's a recurring theme. God does something incredible, God saves them, God moves for them, and then you fast forward just a little bit, and they're like, oh no, God has abandoned us, God is not here. And God is definitely still there. Yet they have forgotten already, which it's easy for us to say that. It's because we get to go and look at the story. We can skip Exodus a little bit and see, okay, what's about to happen? We don't have to read all the fear that's happening. We can skip and see, hey, is this going to end good or bad? But the truth is, that question that's asked about the people of God is still pretty valid for us today. Have we forgotten already? And this fear that exists, it shows up in our lives. It shows up as anxiety. It shows up in questions like, how is this going to work out? It creates a dozen what-if statements as we're trying to fall asleep. It shows up and it's the only thing we can think about, and so we're going through the motions of our life because we can't push pause, and sometimes we can't tell the outside world what's happening internally with us. And so we're showing up, and we still got to go to work, and we still have our friends that are expecting us, and they're looking, and they're like, hey, what's up with you? What's going on? And you're like, oh, nothing's wrong with me. Nothing's going on. But you know that there's this thing that you're concerned about, and and it just plays over and over in your brain, like this what if thing over and over. What if? But you can't say it out loud. But it's consumed everything that you got, and it transforms the way you interact with other people. And you realize it, but you try not to realize it because you don't want to give into that. You want to have the conversation out loud. You just want to have it up here because it's safer there. It's almost like if it's happening here, it's not really happening, but you know it really is happening because it's happening here. And it's just, you're spinning in circles, and it's like, man, this anxiety is killing me. You can't focus on anything else. The truth is, fear is dangerous. Fear is dangerous. It'll convince you that a life of slavery is better than a life of freedom. And if that ain't the story of nearly every single person I've ever met caught in addiction, I don't know what is. Fear is dangerous. And this fear, like I said, we could read the story of God, the people of God, and we can see this recurring theme. Have they forgotten already? This fear, this anxiety grips them. The truth is, it's the same for us. But here's the deal. You don't even have to read the Bible. You don't have to be a follower of Jesus to understand how big a motivator fear is. You don't have to have any connection with Jesus. It is something from the basic form of humanity that almost every one of us is innately aware of, that fear is an incredible motivator. And none of us are exempt from it. I'll give you an example. Let's talk about politics for a second. Yeah. The Democrats will tell you, if Trump wins this election, the Constitution is gone, our country is done. Republicans will tell you, Joe Biden wins this election, everything in America is going to stop. The things that you hoped for, fought for, lived for, all of it's going to be done. They're packed to court. Both sides say the same thing. If the other person wins, life as you know it is over. There was a thought in my life for the longest time that this would be the year I ran for president. I'm glad you're laughing. No. Yeah, right. But you know the thing that I noticed that I don't know how I would get past? Is I don't know how, well, I do know how, is we've stopped talking about the incredible things we can do because we know we can scare someone else and have greater control over them if we scare them about what someone else might do. And so we don't have elections based upon principles and based upon this is the vision for what I want to see going forward. Our election's about you surely don't want what they want. Fear. It's an incredible motivator. So they're in the middle of this, they're panicking. They're like, Egyptians are coming. They're Paul revering this bad boy. Egyptians are coming, Egyptians are coming. They're talking to Moses about his backwards plan of get us in the desert, bury us. They're even reminding them, don't you remember we told you to leave us alone? Moses answered the people in verse 13. He said, do not be afraid. Okay. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. Now, in this moment, I want you to pay close attention. This is a young group of people, and there's mixed generations in there, so there's some very much so folks at the very end of their life, very beginning stage of life, and everything in between. So when I say old, I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about it's a young, spiritually young group of people, and Moses knows this. Moses knows that, yes, they've been walking through and faithful to God, but they've given up on God. They're like, hey, maybe he's given up on us. We've been in slavery for so long. And so they're spiritually immature. And so Moses takes this moment to say, hey, let me teach you how to be faithful. And that's how you teach someone to be faithful. You tell them, hey, the Egyptians are coming. This is how you're faithful. Don't be afraid. Stand firm. That's how you teach someone to be faithful. A lot of times, we might even ask the question, are you faithful? I'm like, yeah, I'm faithful. Are you a person of faith? Yeah, I'm a person of faith. It's easy to be a person of faith and to be faithful when the Egyptians can't be seen and they're still coming and you don't know they are. However, it's completely different once the Egyptians have perched over the hill and then they've kind of come over and you all of a sudden see that your reality is going to change. Then the question is, are you still faithful? And honestly, I think you could make a decent argument that in the midst of everything going right in your life, you haven't experienced faithfulness yet. It's not until the Egyptians, whatever your Egyptians might be, cross the hill and you are then keenly aware that your reality is going to change because of what's coming at you. It's then you get to see, am I really faithful? And in that moment, the people of God, the Israelites, the Hebrews, they were not being faithful. They were blaming Moses. They were saying there's some other plan. They had decided, that's it, I'm done for, we're gonna die. There was no faithfulness in that. And Moses took that opportunity not to shame them, not to say, good gracious, have you forgotten already? He just says, no. Let me show you what we're gonna do. Let me show you what we're gonna do. Don't be afraid. Did the Egyptians have all of the ability to end their life? Yes. And he said, hey, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Stand firm. He was teaching this immature group of people. This is what life is going to be. We are going to walk through things in our life that we can see coming, maybe sometimes from a mile away, and there is nothing we can do to stop them from getting closer. And in that moment, we have to ask ourselves, are we faithful? Not just faithful, are we really faithful? And then we get to One of my favorite verses in all the Bible. I would go out on a limb and say it is the verse that I have read more times in my life than any other verse. My eyes, which a lot of times I'll do the Bible on a computer. Obviously, I do my Bible on my iPad, do it on my phone. This verse, bar none, is the verse that I have opened my paperback Bible and opened to more often than any other verse in the entirety of Scripture. Moses tells them this in Exodus 14:14. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. He's saying, in other words, stop trying to solve the problem that only God can solve. Stop trying to logic your way through a problem. That the only way through this is God's going to have to do something. And so you're not going to be able to figure it out. That's what I have to tell myself, because I'm a problem solver by nature. As soon as you tell me you have a problem, as I'm listening to you, I'm solving it for you. I'll tell you, that's rude, I know. But as you're saying it, I'm already thinking, this is how you fix that. And I try to tell myself not to, but I just do, you know? And so when I have problems of my own, I'm like, I can solve this problem. I can work this. I can work the problem. I can work it. I'm a quick thinker. Let's go. Let's go. But this is a great reminder for me. It's like, no, there's no other explanation. Like, I can put all the brain power I've got. I can call all my buddies and say, hey, I need you to work this problem. I'm in trouble. I'm struggling with this. But the truth is, it's not a problem I have the ability to solve. It's not a problem that I have the capacity to do something about. And it's in that moment I've got to remember, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. God is with me. God is with me. God knows the problem. God knows my limitations. God knows I've reached my capacity. God knows I've got nothing else to give to get around this situation. And the people of God, there was a mountain range to the left and a mountain range to the right and a sea behind them and the Egyptian army in front of them, barreling down on them. And there was no option for them. And that's when Moses says, God's going to do something. Just be still. Now, verse 15, we get to this place, and obviously there's something that happens between verse 14 and 15 the Bible doesn't tell us. It just tells us God's reaction to whatever Moses said to him. Verse 15 says this, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Hold on, God, wait 1 second. Verse 14 clearly says, don't move. That's what be still means, God. I don't know if you're aware in English, be still means don't move. And then in verse 15, you tell Moses, why are you crying to me? Move. It's like, well, can we get on the same page? Can we get on the same page, please? I'm sure Moses was like, okay, where should we move, God? Mountains, sea, chariots of fire. Not really a fire, but it just went, you know. Where should we move? God wanted them to move where only God could take them. Verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The wind begins to blow, and it blows their panic out into the sea. And suddenly the sea begins to part. It says the wind just blew all night. And it says the people of God started to walk through the Red Sea with a wall of water on your left and a wall of water on their right. And I can fathom what this looks like because I've seen Prince of Egypt, you know? Prince of Egypt had a whale, like a shadow of a whale. I don't think there's a whale, I mean, that could be. I don't know. What do I know? But a wall of water left and right. I think the crazy thing is it says that they walked across on dry ground. It wasn't just the waters made part of it, but the ground that was absolutely underwater for decades and decades and decades. However long the Red Sea's been there. Dry. And they walk across, they parade across, they get to the other side, they make their way through it. Of course, the Egyptians see them, and Pharaoh's still like, hey, we need their services. Let's go get them. He pursues them. I'm sure as they get to the other side, the people get up on the bank and they realize they've crossed the Red Sea, and they're like high-fiving, like, what did we just do? You know? And it's like, yeah, this is incredible. And they're like high-fiving, and they're like, oh, this is incredible. And then somebody at some point is like, oh, Moses, the Egyptians are coming too, you know? Verse 26. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, not one of them survived. Imagine that scene. He just raises his hands. Two walls of water just... And then we get to the most important part of the story. Hands down. If you stop there, you miss it. You got to get to verse 30, 31. I'll read it for you. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. Here it is. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. I'll read the important part one more time. The people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. You see, the narrative starts with them having a fear of the Egyptians, but it finishes with them having a fear of the Lord. And so I want to pause in that most important part and ask you the same question. Do you fear God? Now, a lot of times I'll ask questions, and sometimes I'll ask for you to answer out loud. This isn't one of those. This would fall in the rhetorical category. I'll ask you again. This time, I actually want you to respond in your head. I want you to say yes or no to yourself, okay? And I want you to hold on to your answer. Now, just to clarify it, because I know sometimes when we've got to say, hey, on a scale 1 to 5, we pick 3. That way we're right in the middle. And you can say kind of. The way this works is if the answer's not yes, then it's no. So it's not like, well, I kind of fear God. No, it's either a yes, and if it's not 100% yes, the answer's no. Okay? So here goes. You're going to tell me through your head. Ready? Do you fear God? So answer right there. Hold the answer, because there's a follow-up question I need to ask you about your answer. Hold your answer. Make sure you got it. If it's not yes, the answer is no. Follow-up question. If I ask God, the same question about you. Does she fear you? Does he fear you? And I put your name there. If I ask God that question, would he have the same answer as you? Does God think you fear him? Now, that's a completely different question, isn't it? The truth is, the fear of God and faith in God go hand in hand. And I would say that if you don't fear God, truth is you've got a faith problem to solve, not a fear problem to solve. Now, the church has made a huge mistake globally with this. And it's a lot with culture because we've got a pendulum that swings generation to generation. Sometimes that pendulum will stay out one side for multiple generations, but we're right now in the middle of what we know as making sure we're very politically correct because we don't want to offend anyone, regardless of what side you want to be on. We're in a place where a lot of times we have to walk on eggshells with really difficult conversations because honestly, people will make a decision that if you don't align exactly with how they want nothing to do with you. And we don't want to break friendship or relationships. And so we'll walk on the eggshell or we'll just avoid the conversations altogether. And what we want is we want to preach the message that God loves everyone. And that's a very true statement. But when we actually study the Bible, we see that faith and that love is coupled together with a very healthy fear of God. And that fear of God is very important. But we don't want people to fear God. We want people to love God. And so we don't want to talk about that. But the truth is, it's very important for us to understand that the fear of God goes hand in hand with faith in God. And I can prove it to you because the more you have faith in God, the more your level of fear in God will by default have to increase. And if it doesn't, then you don't actually have faith in what you think. I'll explain it to you. Here we go. Number one, you can have faith that he is always good, like really good. And you can have that faith. I believe God is good. I believe God is not just like our good, but he is really good. And I believe that. And I got faith in that. But let's pause for a second and ask the question. If you have faith that he is really good, then by default, you will then have a fear that says this: I know I'm not this kind of good. Like, because I know what God is, and I can begin to wrap my mind around the goodness of God, I also am self-aware. I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm not good like God is. I don't have the ability to be. I messed that up. And so that creates a little fear with us. We can have faith to know that he deserves to be worshiped. Like, yes, because he loves us and we love him, he deserves to be worshiped. We owe him our worship. In fact, we might even talk about in church from time to time, it's not just when the band's playing, singing a song kind of worship, but it's that all of our lives are supposed to be worship. We might even study a Bible passage that says, whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. That it's worship. That everything you do, even in the 167 hours outside of the 1 hour you come to gatherings on Sundays, that all of that would be worship. And so we can have faith that God deserves to be worshiped. And that's a great thing. But then with that comes the reality of this fear. I take some of his worship and I give it to others. That we know that there are things in our life that order our steps that's not God. That dictate our path that has nothing to do with God. That influences our wants and our desires, and it's not connected to godly thoughts, but we have taken it and we said, we're going to invest in you. We're going to invest our time or maybe our finances, for sure our mental space, and we're going to invest in you. And we're going to think on you. And we're going to concentrate on you. And we're going to order our lives around you. And we know deep down, these are things that I ought to be giving towards God because he deserves all of my worship. But I've taken some of that and I have given it to other things. And so that creates a little fear in me. That we have a faith that he knows everything about me. And what a great faith. It's like, man, he knows. Let's go back to he's good, really good. He knows I'm not good. He knows. But he still loves me. Like that's such, I have that kind of faith. But then with that, I also must have a fear that he knows everything about me. In fact, he not only knows everything about me, not only does he know everything about me, he knows the why behind everything about me. And not only does he know the why behind everything about me, he watched it happen. So it's not that he's just heard about it or read about it in some kind of Cliff Notes summary of our life. He watched the things happen with his own eyes. That brings some fear to us. But we have a faith. We have a faith that he knows what's best for me. It's like, yeah, I trust you, God. I got faith that you know what's best for me. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my next job. I don't know if I'm supposed to have kids, not have kids, get married, not get married, stay single, whatever it is. Like, you know what's best for me. And I want to trust you with that. I want to trust you with that. But then that comes with a fear. And the fear is, I disagree with what things are best for me, right? I disagree sometimes with what he thinks is best for me. Because God, he has an opinion about everything, right? Like, you know those people have opinions about everything? Like, stop. God's like that, but worse. He's got an opinion about every single thing. Like, everything. He has an opinion about our sexual ethics. A very specific, detailed opinion about them. He has an opinion. He has an opinion about how you're supposed to handle difficult, rude, and obnoxious people in your life. A very specific opinion about that. He has an opinion about what you're supposed to do with your mental headspace when someone wrongs you. He has an opinion about that. He has an opinion about how you should orchestrate your finances. He has an opinion about that. He has an opinion about how you should orchestrate the things that are free time in your life and what you should give your life to. He has an opinion about it. He has an opinion about what you ought to do with your career. He has an opinion about how you ought to leverage your career to better the kingdom of God in your community. He has an opinion about it all. He has an opinion about how you could raise your kids. He has an opinion how you should take care of your aging parents. He has an opinion about all of those things. And we don't agree with a lot of those things. And that creates some fear. It's like, I trust you, I trust you, I trust you, I trust you. Not with this. Now I'm going to take that one back. 8 out of these 10 things I got, but these 2, you and I do not line up. It creates some fear. We have a faith that he is just. That we know that there are people that have gotten away with things done towards us or done towards people we love, and they've gotten off scot-free. But we have a faith that God is just and that God will not allow them to continue on, right? We believe God is just. But we also have a fear that I know I'm guilty. We have a faith that he will and should seek justice. But that also then brings a fear that I know he'll keep his word. And what if he comes for me? At the end of the day, we have a faith that Jesus allows me to sit in the tension of faith in God and fear of God with assurance of a real relationship with him. And that's a faith we can have. However, that also, if we're honest, creates another fear. But why? Why? Why me? Why this moment in history? Why this circumstance? Why do you allow this suffering? Why did you heal her and not him? Why did you seem to be present in this moment and absent in this one? Fear, faith, hand in hand. Now the difference is the fear of the Egyptians, or for you, the fear of whatever's coming for you over the hill. The fear of that takes you to slavery. The fear of God leads to freedom. You see, the Israelites celebrated their fear in God. And that when the waters came through, they celebrated their faith and their fear at the same time. And so we can't separate the two. It's important that we know that God loves us and that we love God, but it's also vitally important that we also recognize we should fear God. That we should have a healthy fear of him, because that healthy fear helps us understand and move towards the things that we will disagree with. It helps us move in a way that's more godly. It helps keep us in our place where we don't say, you know what, I'm going to rewrite the moral code on God's behalf because he's just not in touch with reality. It keeps us from doing that. It says, you know what, I'm going to have faith that you know what's best for me, and I'm also going to live in fear that I disagree, but my faith and my fear are going to live in this tension that says I'm going to submit to you even though I'm telling you I don't understand and I don't like it. It didn't bring me peace and none of those things, but I have so much faith in you. Please don't abandon me as I disagree with you. Don't abandon me as I wrestle with you and I struggle with you. Will you please love me even though I'm bearing everything I have in my innermost thoughts to you? Will you still love me? And God's sitting there saying, yeah, I will love you even though 5 minutes ago you were terrified of the Egyptians. I still came to save you. I'm still going to love you, and I'm going to get you through the sea, and I'm going to get you to the other side, even though 35 minutes ago you were saying, oh, you brought us to the desert to die. It's like, I already knew, and I already know. So yeah. Fear and faith. Truth is, and we've said this over and over again throughout this series, the better we know the story of Moses, the better we understand the purpose of Jesus. And I'll show you right now in one of the most popular verses ever quoted or read aloud in the history of the Bible. And it proves for all of us that fear of God and faith in God go hand in hand. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. Fear and faith go hand in hand. Fear of God, faith in God grow together.